you're going to have to be in a shelter in your home for up to 2 to 3 days, possibly longer.
For American Valley News, I'm Rusty P.
If we lose this cultural war, we're going to have a hedonistic, humanistic society.
Discover the story of the culture warrior Don Wildman and how he went head-to-head with Hollywood, Playboy, the homosexual agenda, and the Disney empire. The movement Don started paved the way for Christians to boldly stand for truth and righteousness in a hostile culture. Watch Culture Warrior today for free. Visit culturewarrior.movie.
Jenna Ellis in the morning on American Family Radio.
I love talking about the things of God because of truth and the biblical worldview. The U.S. Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognize come from God, our Creator, not our government. I believe that Scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning. It is Monday, October 27th. We are already very close to the end of the month, and Friday, more pretrial issues were going on in the Utah courtroom, where a man who is accused of killing Charlie Kirk back September 10th appeared in court, and his lawyers have filed a number of pretrial motions and also requested more time to review evidence during that second court appearance. So a lot of these things are actually very routine. There's a lot of speculation and some other things online that are suggesting that, for example, requesting that the defendant wear plain clothes instead of the prison garb to court is somehow unique. That's in a lot of cases, especially very high-profile ones, so that the jury can view the defendant as just a regular person, not have that kind of perception bias seeing that kind of prison garb. So, a lot of these are very routine, but I want to talk about the video in the courtroom. The defense team is requesting that video not be in the courtroom, and I completely disagree with that, but let's bring on our first guest, Jared Folletti, who is senior counsel at the Lawfare Project. And Jared, here is my overarching reason. This is obviously a worldwide event in terms of seeking justice for Charlie Kirk. I'm not going to be on the jury, obviously. I don't live in Utah, but, I would be way too biased, among other reasons. So I can say this. I think that with at least just the evidence that has come out in the public so far, I think there is reason to believe that they got the right person. We'll see what comes out. He deserves a fair trial, due process, all of that. But I also believe that if and when found guilty, he deserves the death penalty. And I believe that the American public especially, but worldwide, deserve to see the evidence, not only for the purposes of justice, the purposes of public interest, but also so that we can quell all of these ridiculous rumors that this is just the fall guy, and then everybody in media will be speculating based on third-party reporting accounts of what happened or what evidence was presented instead of seeing it ourselves. So I think that there is a huge public interest factor that would outweigh any other potential reasons that the defense could have. So good morning, and what do you think about that?
Well, good morning, Jenna. I completely agree with you. I think that in a case like this, the public interest mitigates in favor of having these proceedings be videotaped and shown to the public. It's far more damaging when you have people speculating about what went on in the courtroom based on second and third-hand reports than actually having video screening so that people can see for themselves. And, of course, there are always concerns that having these proceedings televised will potentially create a problem with a jury pool, but that's a problem that you're not going to get around in a case that's this high profile, whether or not there's video in the courtroom. So you really have to take all that into account when you're the judge.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what do we know so far about this judge who is presiding over this case in terms of anything that's in the public record or just in terms of, fairness, those kinds of things?
Well, from what we understand, this is a judge who's an experienced jurist in Utah, and I think this is what Tony Graff of the Fourth Circuit in Utah, and what we know is that he has been presiding over cases for many years, and his success rate in the sense that he has not often been overturned for rulings on the bench. So this is a very thorough jurist who follows, by all accounts, a very good interpretation of the law.
And that's good. That's exactly what you want, is someone who is fair. And that, by the way, doesn't mean, for listeners, that then fairness means that the prosecution will win every motion, nor should it mean that the defense will win every motion. It means that the judge should remain unbiased, look at the pretrial motions presented, weigh them according to the law, and then ultimately preside over the trial and allow the jury to be the fact finders, if it goes that far, by the way, because I think we're kind of getting a little bit ahead, but I personally would be very surprised if anything in terms of a plea agreement happens in this case, only because the prosecutors have said that they are seeking the death penalty. So there's really nowhere to go in terms of a plea agreement. The only thing that may and sometimes happens is that the defense and the prosecution, in, of course, consultation with the victim's family, and obviously the victim's family here, Erica Kirk, would have meaningful input, but would not direct the proceedings. That's up to the prosecutor. But the only thing that may happen is that there would be a resolution to just say, okay, life in prison without the possibility of parole. But because this case is so high profile, that I think would upset a lot of people if that kind of plea agreement were reached and Utah didn't actually pursue the death penalty, which just as a general matter, I'm in favor of. I think there is a biblical argument for the death penalty, but I also think that there is a deterrence factor, and there is also a true justice element here, because assuming that this man is found guilty and is the perpetrator, to murder Charlie Kirk in cold blood, I mean, what happened here absolutely deserves the death penalty, because why should he continue to live when he cut off Charlie Kirk's life at only 31 years of age? I mean, that there's no other form of judicial remedy and state-enforced justice for this type of crime than the death penalty. Anything else would fall short.
Since biblical times, when you intentionally take a life without justification, the punishment has been that you forfeit your right to live, that you forfeit your freedoms, that you have cast such a shadow on God's law that you no longer have that right. So the death penalty today is very much an extension of what we had in biblical times, and it's very much an understanding of the Old Testament and even through the New Testament. So this is something that I agree with you. The death penalty is something that's very appropriate in a lot of cases. And in a case like this, when it looks like the crime was so heinous, so premeditated, so contemplated, and had such a wide impact beyond just Charlie Kirk himself, then it's a very appropriate penalty. At the end of the day, I think we will see what the evidence shows. The defense motion for more time to review evidence is very normal, but also sometimes it leads to a contemplation of maybe there isn't a challenge to be had to the evidence. Maybe my client actually is not going to be able to say convincingly, I didn't do this. Maybe it is time to enter a plea, and maybe Charlie Kirk's widow will agree to something that is less than a death sentence based on forgiveness or other principles. So I think there's a lot up in the air, and we have to see how that plays out.
Yeah, and this could take some time as well. I mean, justice, unfortunately, in this country is not swift, but that is often what due process requires. And so even if we get to a jury, we get to, conviction, all of that. There are still post-conviction appeals. There's still just a whole process, which, a lot of people, Gerard, including me. I mean, these are things, obviously, that that just in the legal space, I've contemplated extensively, that judicial reform it's such a a heavy topic, I think, because a lot of times when situations like this arise, then there's a lot of emotional attachment, which is not what you want in terms of law and principles. The principles of justice should not follow emotion, should follow principle, should follow process. And yet, when we are looking at a case like this and how justice is not swift, there are often conversations about how the death penalty, if and when imposed, is not swift, and it can take 30 plus years of appeal. So it's almost a partial life sentence in that sense, and that the families are just waiting for so long before it's actually imposed, and it's a huge burden on taxpayers. I mean, the death penalty and death row inmates and that kind of facility and all of that is not inexpensive. And so there is a policy argument that some make as well to say that the death penalty as a whole just isn't practical in a modern sense. And in a sense, I agree with that, but I don't think that indicates that the argument there, the policy argument therefore becomes, well, we should just remove the death penalty from the statutes, because I think if you don't have that option, then you would never be able to come to a plea agreement of life in prison without parole, because that would be the highest possible penalty. So why not just go to trial every time, right? But on the same hand, I think that the policy argument should be there should be a quicker opportunity for appeals and to exhaust those so that justice is carried out more swiftly.
I think that you're right. And when you look at the number of capital cases, when you look at the number of death penalty impositions, they are not that significant that you couldn't have a more speedy review, a more speedy appeal process, a more speedy second look at these cases. Ultimately, the biggest concern with death penalty cases is that a person is wrongfully convicted and wrongfully put to death. And unfortunately, in American history, we have had people who were exonerated after they received that sentence. And there's that exoneration after you've been put to death is meaningless. So we do want to make sure that we get it right to the biggest extent that we can. But that shouldn't be a process that takes decades. That's a process that is better served when the evidence is fresh, when the witnesses are still around to testify or retestify. So there is a lot that can and should be done to streamline the process, but the death penalty should stay on the table for some of these crimes that are committed, which are just so heinous that you couldn't imagine that life in prison would be a suitable end. I was just reading this morning of an illegal immigrant who decapitated his manager in Texas. That's not a case where you look at this person and you think he deserves to live in prison for the next 40 years on a taxpayer's dime. That was so hideous of a crime that maybe the death penalty is appropriate, just as with Charlie Kirk.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll continue, of course, to follow this case and see ultimately what the judge's rulings are. And in the last 2 minutes that I have with you, Gerard Filletti, Senior Counsel of the Lawfare Project, you can follow him on X at Gerard Filletti. I'd encourage you to do that. Always appreciate having your insights. And we'll turn to another story that is a little bit more lighthearted just by comparison and has actually kind of taken the internet by storm in romanticizing it, actually. And of course, I'm talking about the Louvre heist that these guys that went up a ladder to the second-story building of the Louvre in Paris, went through a window, and then did basically kind of a smash and grab, and were in and out in 7 or 8 minutes and got away on scooters. I mean, this is kind of like Ocean's 11 drama. And like, I'm waiting for the movie version to come out, but it'd have to be like one of those short films, because this isn't long enough unless you do like a bunch of backstory. But it's kind of taken the internet by storm because everyone is romanticizing kind of an old era sort of robbery that, we don't really see usually in the era, in the 21st century or 2025. And I've just loved all of the reenactments on Instagram. It's like my new favorite thing to doom scroll is just seeing all of these reels of people who were imitating like the security guards, or there was, how they must have been, oh, we the French, and so we're just out on a smoking break, we don't care, and and so go rob the jewels, whatever. And then the people posting like this individual on X. Honestly, I was worried I was living in an era too late to see cool heists, and it's kind of funny that everybody's is romanticizing it. There was another post where somebody said, security people who I would trust more than the Louvre security guards. And some of them was like, TSA. I mean, if you have a water bottle, they'll stop you. The DMV, I mean, if you don't come with your correct documentation, they stop you. But, the Louvre security, they'll just be like, Crown Jewels, we'll let it go. So this has been hilarious. But now there is a report that at least one suspect or two, at least as of yesterday, I think, have been caught. And so overall, Gerard, there was a lot of speculation on the internet that just because of kind of the unique nature of this crime, a lot of the internet was actually cheering for these guys to get away with it, which in a sense is kind of funny. But it also reminded me, though, on a more serious note, of how we don't in this society have a standard of moral right or wrong anymore. And if we think that the crime is committed in a cool way, or we think that, the guy like Luigi Maggioni, who, has become like an internet sensation because people think he's good looking, then suddenly we're on his side. I mean, things like this actually have a social consequence, or maybe it's just evidence of social change in a way that I think is actually very damaging.
I think we've normalized acceptance of doing the wrong thing for these so-called right reasons. And we dramatize this. We put this on TV, in movies and shows. And let's face it, who doesn't love a good heist movie? This may not have been Thomas Crown Affair or Ocean's 11. This seemed more like the Pink Panther, especially farcical with the French security. But at the end of the day, people are laughing and cheering because they see this as something romantic. They see this notion of you're taking jewels from the 19th century and stealing them, and maybe they're going to help fund an orphanage somewhere. They're not. They're going into the pocket of crooks and making a profit. But people have become so immune to the logic of reason and morality of crime when they watch TV movies. Everything is romanticized these days. And among the top things that are romanticized are heists, which this was. When it's so farcical, it's even better because it does create this memes on the internet and it feeds on itself. But at the end of the day, we have to remember this was a cultural wound to France, and these people committed a crime. These people committed a crime of massive proportions. There's nothing to glamorize here. Just like with Luigi Mangione or any other one who commits a heinous act, we have to remember these people are acting against the morals of society.
Yeah, really well said. And, while we do, I mean, and, I love Ocean's 11 and, the whole thing. Ocean's 8, I think that was the one with all women. I didn't even watch that one because I was like, this is ridiculous. But in terms of, some of these other romanticized films and all that, that's all, well and good, and that's fine. But at the same time, when it comes to real life, there's a lot of commentary as well online that people are saying, well, nobody got hurt, so I think it's okay that these guys get away with it. And I'm thinking, if that's actually the principle and the standard here, to say, well, we're for the criminal as long as it's a cool heist, as long as it's romanticized, and as long as we think that, in our arbitrary metric, that there was no quote unquote harm, then that kind of commentary makes it so much more difficult to actually enforce morality on a society that it's very subjective.
But that also shows the nature of the problem. Kids don't learn morality anymore. When you go to school, you learn that anything goes if it makes you feel better. And then what don't they learn? They don't learn from their parents who are too busy working to put a roof over their heads. And they don't go to church. They don't have that faith-based influence anymore. That's something that's severely lacking. So they're not getting their moral upbringing from their parents or from school. They're not getting it from the church. They're getting it from movies. They believe that it's okay, and it's reinforced by schools, by woke progressive ideology, that anything goes so long as no one gets hurt and you feel better. And this is what we're seeing. This is why people are reacting the way that they are. Nobody got hurt. It's only money. they're not learning morality anymore. Schools are reinforcing this notion, and unfortunately we're seeing fewer and fewer people being influenced by the church, which is a very tragic thing because that was always the biggest source of moral right and wrong.
Yeah, really well said. And we've got to take a break here, Gerard Folletti. But, as much as I love, doom scrolling some of the funny parody around it, and we can laugh, at the end of the day, this is something that I think, as you rightly said, we need to ensure that morals are reinforced. And this is why even some of the movies and the things that we allow our kids to watch, and as we discuss these things, looking at how entertainment and the romanticized lens of Hollywood often paints the moral wrongdoers as the heroes, or somehow sympathetic when, all villains have a backstory now, as if that justifies, okay, we're fine with the evil queen doing what she did to Snow White or Maleficent, like all the Disney villains, just because they have a backstory, so it's okay. No, moral right and wrong are still objective, and so really well said. And we'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
This is Bible League International. Not far from the conflict in the Middle East right now, Mahmoud was an Islamic cleric. He accepted the invitation of a Christian friend to attend a Bible study.
I was born and brought up in a Muslim family. I started reading the Bible not to know the Word of God, but to find out the faults.
The Holy Spirit would convince Mahmoud he was a sinner and there was no other name under heaven by which to be saved except that of Jesus. He was labeled an infidel, kicked out of his village, his family's left him. He's never seen them since. But today he's a pastor and a church planter. He's planted 15 churches ranging from 13 to 30 people, and he's praying for Bibles there in the Middle East. By October 31st, Reformation Day, AFR and Bible League want to bless 4,000 Bibleless believers. You've done it for 2,000. We've got a long way to go. So at $5 a Bible, $100 sends 20, 500 sends 100, and every gift matched. Will you call 800-YES-WORD? 800-YES-WORD. That's 800-YES-WORD, or give it sendbiblesnow.org. Sendbiblesnow.org.
Jim Scudder here for today's Moment in Grace. We often think our money follows our heart, but Jesus says it works the other way around. In Matthew 6:21, he tells us, "Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." That means when we choose to give to God, our hearts will be drawn to the things of God. King David modeled this beautifully. Though he knew he would not build the temple, he poured his personal wealth into preparing it. His money went to God's house, and his heart followed. If you find your heart far from God, take a look at where your money is going. Invest in what matters to Him, and your heart will follow. For daily devotionals delivered straight to your email, go to ingraceradio.com.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Starnes. Stand by for news and commentary next. The Democrat Party is encouraging the American people to take up arms against the Trump administration. It is a very dangerous thing, and it has to stop. Most recently, a man tried to drive a U-Haul truck backwards through the entrance to Coast Guard Station Alameda in California. Security forces opened fire, stopping the attack. Shots were fired during an ICE traffic stop in Los Angeles, injuring a federal agent. 3 more agents injured when they were rammed by a car in San Diego. And in Dallas, 2 illegals were killed when a sniper opened fire outside an ICE detention facility. Those bullets, by the way, meant for federal agents. In response, Democrats announced they're launching a master ICE tracker, a website that will provide the exact locations of ICE agents. In other words, they are aiding and abetting very dangerous people. As it now stands, the Democrat Party has decided to cast their lot with the criminals and undermine public safety. Be careful out there, folks. I'm Todd Starnes.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. Well, as we continue to be in the era of the AI or artificial intelligence race, this is, to me, kind of evokes maybe perhaps another romanticized era of the U.S. space race and all of the the space tech race back in the 1960s, and we'll see what kind of movies are shaped based on this era. There was a really fascinating piece in Axios that is talking about America's energy jam. At least that's how the article phrases it. It says America faces America faces an economy-shaping energy jam. We've never needed more of it more urgently to meet rising consumer and business demand, as two authors write in a behind-the-curtain column. What they say why it matters is that we produce and export more energy than at any point in history, but the data centers powering the AI boom suck up so much energy so fast, it's increasingly elevating prices for nearby ordinary residents. So the big picture, according to Axios, is that this dynamic, surging demand and finite supply, is playing out in community after community. It creates a difficult tension, according to Axios, for President Trump, who wants to both accelerate artificial intelligence and slow energy spikes for consumers. So for more on this, let's welcome in Patrick Hedger, who is the Net Choice Director of Policy. And so, this is kind of an interesting dynamic here with artificial intelligence. Where are we headed?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation out there about the impact that data centers are having on the electric grid. Really what we're seeing is a strain from overall economic growth, renewed manufacturing, increased home building, and data centers are all contributing to load growth demand. But the real problem here is supply. When we think about why are housing prices high, for example, we shouldn't be blaming demand. We always say we need to build more housing. And it's the same thing with energy and electricity. We need to be building more supply. Because we don't want to shrink our economy to meet our electric grid. We need to grow our electric grid to meet our economy. And what we've seen actually in Virginia, where most of the data centers in the world at this point are, over half of the internet traffic in the world flows through Northern Virginia, electricity prices have been actually lower than the rest of the country and grown at a slower pace than the rest of the country because data centers come with a lot of investment in the electric grid around them.
And that makes sense. I mean, are there any concerns that if we grow the electric grid, I mean, we're already very dependent on that, but it would become more of a risk for, some of these other sort of technological kinds of warfare from, some enemies like China. I mean, there's been a conversation over the last, 5 or so years, if not longer, about how a power grid outage could have just absolutely drastic economic effects on the United States.
Yeah, so when I talk about investing and growing our electric grid, that also means hardening the electric grid. That means improving the existing infrastructure, building better, new, more resistant transmission lines, and building in redundancy. That means building lots of smaller power plants, potentially small nuclear and power plants that can be co-located with data centers, for example. And that also means hardening the cybersecurity aspects around the electric grid as well. So we really need investment in all of those aspects. Growing the grid and also improving the grid, it should be considered a subcategory of growth. And data centers, the companies that are building America's AI infrastructure, the trillion-dollar companies that are Google, Meta, Microsoft, Amazon, have the resources to do this.
Yeah, and it's really fascinating. I mean, when you think about what the AI race actually means, I mean, this is a structural issue. I mean, it's definitely a hardware issue, but it's also a software issue, and where a lot of people have just been focused on more of the software, like what is the AI bias, how are people using it, the policy surrounding that. But what you're talking about more is just the actual infrastructure that's needed. I think a lot of people when we go and post online on social media, it seems to just kind of go out into this kind kind of ethosphere that doesn't actually have a physical location. Where if people remember the online platform Parler, that it didn't have its own servers and was essentially renting basically from Amazon. And then during all of the Trump first term, kind of post-election stuff where everybody was getting canceled for things that they were posting online, that entire platform was basically canceled by Amazon because they said, hey, we're not going to allow you to store all of your data here. And so it was essentially just taken offline in a day, which is really crazy when you think about that. And so the ownership of these types of things is also important. What role do you see, or that type of contrast in terms of artificial intelligence versus with these private companies building the infrastructure versus the government?
Yeah, so what we saw really during the Biden administration was a lot of pressure on social media companies, technology companies to take down and censor speech. And you want to make sure that those tools are not in the hands of government. So the idea of government owning and operating data centers is far more concerning to me towards that end. If you elect another progressive administration in the future that doesn't have the same sort of respect for free speech, that becomes really concerning. And so really the answer is to let 1,000 flowers bloom. You want to have as much competition as possible. You want to have as many potential private providers of those services as possible so that it is easy for companies to switch. And it's and that way you don't have sort of those concerns that we had in the past. And that means, again, building redundancy. And it's also important to point out that when we talk about what data centers do, yes, there's AI processing, yes, there's hosting of websites, but all of those videos of the 4th of July fireworks that you have on your phone that you rarely watch again, or all the pictures that you never delete, all of those recipes that you have stored, those aren't stored on your phone. They're actually stored on a data center. So it is really trying to meet the data storage and processing needs for everyday Americans as well.
Wow. Yeah. And this is why, by the way, I'm still a huge fan of printing out photos. Not only do I like just, putting them up around my house and, you can see it more physically than just in your phone if you happen, to scroll back, months and years ago. But for that exact reason, because so much of our data, when it is a third-party storage platform, that has the potential of being erased. I mean, it's like renting out a storage unit for your physical things. If something happens to that, even though, yes, you technically own it, you don't own the storage facility. And there can be regulations and rules around that may prevent you from accessing that compartment in the future. And that's actually really scary. So in terms of, this balance, though, when it comes to freedom of speech and expression and all this, one of the critical parts in terms of just the software part of artificial intelligence that's concerning to me is how open it is. Because right now, when we look at all of the lawfare that happened during the Biden administration and how much privacy there still is and should be surrounding technology and what the government can't intrude into your private files. When you have, searches and returns and, all of the things that everybody does on AI platforms, when that's open to the public, that can create a lot of privacy issues. And so where should policy be going in terms of artificial intelligence just for privacy concerns, but also freedom of speech, and so people can't be canceled, perhaps, or any way regulated by a government entity based on their AI usage?
Yeah. So there's legislation that's been being proposed that would, one, prevent or it's designed to curb the ability of government to put pressure on tech companies to be able to take down legal speech and grant a right for people to potentially be able to sue those actors in government that are doing that. So I think that's a positive development. We're waiting to see some legislative text there. But what's also really important, and we've needed this even prior to AI, Congress has yet to pass a national privacy and data security standard. We have states that are passing versions, but that creates a problem where you have 50 different rules for data privacy, even though the Internet is fundamentally interstate commerce. right? If I send a text message to somebody even within my state, it's probably going to pass through a server that goes out of state. So we're talking about fundamentally interstate commerce that is absolutely the domain of Congress, and Congress has really dropped the ball in terms of putting together basic rules of the road about expectations around securing consumer data and also what consumers can and cannot expect of companies. And so that's something Congress really, really needs to do. And that will actually help AI investment and innovation because companies will know here are the standards that we need to build to and not have a question mark in terms of which state are we in and what are those standards, which really increases compliance costs.
And I'm speaking with Patrick Hedger, who is the Net Choice Director of Policy. And, some AI and tech restrictions and some rules were passed under the One Big Beautiful Bill, but it really was more broadly focused on prohibiting foreign entities in federally supported AI and so forth. So this more dealt with almost like a foreign policy element than it did with establishing rules of the road, as you suggested. Why didn't Congress include some of those in the One Big Beautiful Bill?
Yeah, there's been a lot of disagreement in terms of what a data privacy or data security standard should look like. I think there's unfortunately a lot of folks are trying to solve too many problems at once, and because that ignores the basics that we still just don't have any sort of basic standards around security. I think it would be a really good idea to create a safe harbor, for example, for companies that meet basic federal cybersecurity standards around consumer data privacy. Because I think most people are concerned with not what the company that you're interacting with is doing with your data, but what happens if that data gets leaked. And so that's really, I think, the paramount concern for folks. And there's also a lot of confusion around data privacy because privacy is ultimately a subjective standard. Privacy means something different to every single person, and depending on what piece of data you're talking about, the level of privacy you expect may be different or want may be different. So there are a lot of questions there, and that's why I think it's really important for Congress to not try to solve every single problem in one fell swoop, but get some of the basic standards that everybody agrees on down into federal law.
Yeah, and that's really fascinating because, I mean, even the standard in terms of what is a reasonable expectation of privacy in a traditional sense and with Supreme Court precedent as it relates to the Fourth Amendment, the Supreme Court has even suggested that there is an objective standard but also a subjective element because what every individual would determine is a reasonable expectation does depend on the individual. And so, you have what the reasonable, prudent person would expect in the same or similar circumstances, but that is still, kind of this moving target. And so especially when we're talking about online privacy and when everyone understands now that when you go into public with everybody having the ability to not only video and photograph and then publish to the world anything that they want to take, I mean, in your local grocery store, walking down the street or whatever, I think that standard comparatively with even a decade ago has really shifted in terms of what the ordinary person would expect in terms of privacy. And so where can, we're talking legislatively, so where can and should Congress go with this, but then also ultimately the judiciary, when it'll be sort of the Supreme Court maybe shaping some of these standards as these things get litigated? What should be the expectation of privacy in terms of online data?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And to your point, things like targeted advertising, to some that may feel like an invasion of privacy, but to others like myself, I like being able to see products and services that are actually relevant to me. And that creates an economic advantage. So one person's privacy can be another person's inconvenience if you were to put a blanket ban on targeted advertising. So we should try to avoid things like that, products and services that actually create real tangible value for folks. But I think the focus really ought to be on more of the data security aspect of privacy, because there are objective measures in terms of, are you using encryption? Are you meeting some of the best practices that the national cybersecurity agencies are saying are the best practices in terms of actually storing consumer data. When we think about the worst privacy breaches that have happened, it's things that leak Social Security numbers and credit card numbers, not necessarily people's location data and what ads they interact with. It's more of those kind of basics, but very critical, sensitive data that get leaked. And so making sure that is stored and companies have an incentive to invest in the secure storage of that information and regular deletion of that information when they don't need it is probably the best path to go down. And I think not all of this needs to be done all at once. Start putting in place the good building blocks, and you will start to improve the situation, and it will improve over what we have now. Waiting for a big comprehensive package that deals with every possible question related to cybersecurity leaves everything vulnerable.
Yeah, that is a really good point. And I'm speaking with Patrick Hedger, who's the Net Choice Director of Policy, that if you try to do too many things at once, you end up then perhaps with more unanswered questions than you actually do solving more immediate problems. And, when you're talking about decluttering your space, I mean, in an age of absolute consumerism that is so in such a disposable kind of society. I mean, even online, when you look at some of these Instagram accounts that, as I've been doing a little bit of, remodeling of my house and, interior design and stuff, I've had more and more things that are targeted advertising. And one of them is decluttering. And it's really interesting to me how so many people, because of our over consumer driven society, and we have things that are not only cheap but affordable, but then the fashion and everything turns over so quickly, it encourages more and more consumerism, and so the individual is left with so much stuff that then we can't house it. And that is true not only for our physical spaces, but with the ability to take just tons and tons and tons of photographs instead of, okay, you have a camera with 24 exposures, choose wisely, and that's it. I mean, we just have kind of this overconsumption mentality that then ultimately does have an effect. And then also you pair that with, when you're talking about privacy, it has been absolutely wild to me seeing Gen Z, how they share their location with literally everybody. It's like they can go into their phone, and I have a friend who's like, oh, my roommate, yeah, I can see that she's still at work, because they have their location data on. And that to me is a total invasion of privacy. Like, I would not want even, my family, I'll share maybe, like my location in terms of here's where I'm driving to, that kind of thing. But to just have somebody be able to see literally where you are at any given moment is surveillance. And yet this next generation, that is totally standard to them, and they don't think of it as an invasion of privacy. They think of it simply as data sharing. And so when we're talking, and there are so many different more examples I could give, but when we talk about big picture of how America needs to win the AI race, I mean, we're talking about a lot of different, policy and a lot of different, the infrastructure component, all of this. So what big picture, what would it mean for America to win the AI race, at least in the short term?
Yeah, so what's really important is to understand that this AI race, we are up against China, and that's basically it. The Europeans have regulated themselves out of relevance in terms of technology. There's no real AI sector to speak of in the European Union, anything close to compared to what's occurring in Silicon Valley or what's happening in China. And so AI is a true general purpose technology. And what I mean by that is think of something like the internet itself or electricity, where that technology powers almost everything in your life at this point. AI is going to have a similar impact. Right now, I know a lot of folks interact with AI as like a chatbot or use it for internet search, but AI is increasingly being used in medicine. It is being used in manufacturing. It's being used in energy. All of these things are so important, and it's really critical that the world AI technology stack, that is the hardware and the software behind AI, is being built by Americans and is being in American values are therefore instilled in those programs. Versus, again, the only peer that we have at this point is China. And imagine if China controlled the production and distribution of electrical equipment at the advent of electricity. If you had a communist country that controlled that technology, that's the stakes that we're up against. And so getting it wrong, taking a unilateral pause is just not an option. When you're dealing with a totalitarian state effectively being the only peer rival in this and potentially controlling a whole new global economy.
Yeah, wow. Well, Patrick Hedger, I completely agree with you that that AI is at the forefront of what we should be concerned about. This is the new frontier. I mean, this is the next space race, basically, with very drastic implications if we get it wrong. And all of this stuff, just from a philosophical, policy, and legal standpoint, is completely fascinating to me. So I really appreciate you staying on this morning to answer a lot of my questions and have this conversation. We'll have to have you back again soon. You can follow Patrick Hedger at Pat_Hedger, Hedger. And then you can also follow NetChoice at NetChoice on X. And we'll continue to talk about artificial intelligence, but we'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
We see and hear about the big public issues happening in our nation's capital, but what about the things that happen behind the scenes? That information can give us the whole story and help shape our opinions. That's why you need to listen to Washington Watch Weekend with Tony Perkins. He and his guests will give you all parts of the Washington news from a conservative Christian perspective. Catch Washington Watch Weekend Saturdays at 5:05 a.m. and 6 p.m. Central, and Sunday mornings at 3 Central on AFR.
As a nurse, I primarily work with children who are abused and exploited in trafficking, and I frequently see very unfair situations. We must talk about the issue of abuse. We can't base our actions on fear. We have to be faith-informed in what we do.
The Dr. Nurse Mama Show. For more from Dr. Jessica Peck, tune in at 2 p.m. Central on American Family Radio or on the podcast page at afr.net.
If you are 65 or older, you know this, inflation is hitting everyone hard right now, especially when it comes to healthcare. Over the last 10 years, healthcare costs have skyrocketed by, get this, 230%. If you have Medicare Parts A and B, you know there are still out-of-pocket expenses like deductibles and co-payments, and they really add up. But here's some good news. MediShare 65 Plus is designed to fill in those gaps and help protect you from rising healthcare costs. At only $99 per month up to age 75, you get peace of mind at a price you can afford. And MediShare is trusted, too. It's been around 30 years. It's not some big impersonal thing. It's a community of people helping each other, business owners, pastors, retirees. People love it. MediShare 65 Plus just makes sense. To learn more, give them a call. They're great to talk to. They'll offer to pray with you each time you call, too. Call now. 833-45-BIBLE. That's 833-45-BIBLE. 833-45-BIBLE.
Do you believe in the absolute inerrancy of God's holy word? Do you believe in the power of the Holy Spirit to radically change lives and empower us to live like Christ? At Wesley Biblical Seminary, we believe God is raising up a movement of people across our nation and across the world who hold fast to the authority of the Bible and the hope of holiness. We are working today to equip tomorrow's pastors and Christian leaders through biblical and theological education and practical ministry that's accredited, affordable, online, and highly personal. Our programs include undergraduate, master's, and doctoral degrees, certificate programs, and even training for lay people. So whatever your next step is in being equipped for ministry, we're here for you. And if you believe these are the kinds of pastors we need leading our churches in the future, we invite you to learn more about partnering with us through giving. Learn more about Wesley Biblical Seminary by visiting us at wbs.edu today.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. And so in this whole age of not only just artificial intelligence, but everything that is so online and how much information we get from social media, from ChatGPT, from just internet searches and all of this, it's really limiting a lot of our individual experience and the intelligence that's actually needed for growth. And this is why books remain the best source of information. You should be reading more, especially the Bible, but reading more books than the time that you spend online. And I know that that is like anathema to Gen Zers, but all of this just reminds us that more data and more information just doesn't necessarily mean more intelligence or more ability to critically analyze. And in the era of everything being online and how these short reels and videos really determine everything from, how we process and consume data, like we were talking about with Patrick Hedger, or even our standards of morality, like we were talking about in the earlier segment with Gerard Folletti, and how people are actually romanticizing all of these criminals just because their aesthetic online makes them, somehow likable and favorable. This has implications for policy and also elections. And so when you kind of connect the dots here and you see how much elections now and candidates have to be visually engaging, they can do the targeted advertising like we were talking about, they can go viral, and then suddenly, if they're likable in a sense more of like a what would you call it, a high school kind of prom king sort of way, one of those types of competitions, rather than actually having the ability to lead effectively or do their job effectively, you get to a candidate like Zohan Mandami, who is currently running for the New York City mayor. Because if you actually look at his characteristics and his experience and also his policy and what he stands for, this guy has absolutely nothing that would suggest that he is qualified and competent to run the largest city in America. A New York City mayor is actually a more important and powerful position than the New York State governor. And everybody in New York, understands this. And the fact that Mamdani has really risen so far, I think, is very attributable in part to the rise of the social media campaigning. And we've seen this in the era of Trump, kind of, for good and for bad here, that Trump was really the first one. Maybe Obama. Obama really did use Facebook quite a bit to do the targeted advertising to young people. And so, got to give him credit for that. But in terms of kind of this online trolling and, being just this larger than life sort of character, right, online, and how everybody, especially young people, really love it, it really mutes the ability to effectively analyze candidates, and it becomes more of a popularity contest than it does a critical vote. And this is where, we've talked well before the rise of online social media about the low information voters and people, who vote for various reasons. But I think that social media, to a large extent, has really transformed elections into more of a popularity contest, almost like, Dancing with the Stars. Like I have a friend, my friend Hannah in the neighborhood, she and her friends every week, watch Dancing with the Stars. And so I get the updates, and I don't know who any of these people are. And she thinks it's hilarious because she'll like read off these names. I'm like, I have no idea. And yet she'll tell me, this person is way better at actually dancing, but this person is just, everybody just loves them, and they're just so liked, and so they weren't voted off. And did they dance as well? No, but everybody wants to see them next week. And that's exactly the mentality that goes into our elections now. It's not actually based on, did you do what you're actually here competing for? And did you do that well? It's more, are you likable and are you popular and can you get the attention? Do people want to tune in next week, right? And maybe that's okay for a reality program like Dancing with the Stars, because that really at the end of the day doesn't matter. But it's teaching us the principle overall that anytime that we get to vote and participate in something, that it only matters what matters to us instead of getting down to the fundamental issue of, is this person actually competent at their job? And people would rather vote for a guy who has the aesthetic that Mamdani has than they would vote for his actual characteristics. And I'm going to make a prediction. I know we're already out of time here. So I'll continue this perhaps tomorrow. But my prediction is that if Mamdani wins in New York City, he's going to run for president in 2028 because the left needs somebody young to counter a J.D. Vance, who is the likely candidate or is a likely candidate for Republicans and who doesn't have a record to counter an attack like Newsom, right? Because Newsom has already been in elected office for a while. Mamdani doesn't really have anything other than his communism, right? And we can attack that, and we should. But he doesn't really have that record. And so we need to be looking very seriously at what the left is doing, because they are always 10 steps ahead, and suggesting to voters right now, this isn't Dancing with the Stars. Elections actually have consequences. You can reach me and my team, Jenna at afr.net.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast